Hello and welcome. I'm Vanessa Roberts, and this is the Power of Technology series on Federal News Network. Today we're going to talk about what secure and collaborative endpoint computing needs to look like now for full and part-time remote employees, as well as employees working in federal offices. Our guests are Tony Celesti, Executive Director and General Manager for Ingram Micro Public Sector, and Dylan Evers. He's the Senior Director for the Devices Federal Solutions Group at Microsoft Federal. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Very nice to be here.
All right, so let's just dive in because this is a really kind of exciting topic and really important right now. How we all work has changed dramatically, accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, with the need to equally support workers at home and on the move and in government offices securely. Really, what are the challenges at the endpoint for agencies? Dylan, can you maybe kick us off and talk a little bit about that and maybe some things that are going on with the Surface for government?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a relevant question today, especially because of how the dynamic since COVID-19 has really impacted the way the government is working and collaborating. And I think there's an increased focus on security at the endpoint to strengthen their zero trust posture. A lot of what we're doing at Microsoft is kind of carrying forward some of the original security principles we brought to bear in Surface, and then going a step further to bring to light some of the maybe legacy practices that government is still on today. So what that means for us is we're still investing in developing our own UFI-based code in the United States, which is a bit of a differentiator for us in comparison to some of the other OEMs. And what that US-based code development allows us to do is to create firmware level management tools for our devices that allow for component level management to do really cool, highly secure component management on our products. So a good relevant example for COVID-19 was we had a deployment in the National Capital Region leveraging this Surface Enterprise Management Mode firmware tool where we had disabled cameras, mics, and wireless for this classified environment. And when they had to put their employees to remote telework, they needed to re-enable that feature set for them to use these devices in their home office. And for other OEM product, they were required to go out and source third-party peripheral items. So where they had physically snipped wires on their cameras, they needed to go get a USB-based camera to enable that worker for telework. On the Surface product, they were able to toggle those components back on in a forensically sound way. So we're able to kind of carry forward all of that now into this new environment. So kind of that legacy security posture and differentiator for Surface. But what we're bringing now to bear also is that legacy authentication practice that the government has been on for years with smart cards and CAT cards and PIV cards. And where we maybe fell short before with the lack of an integrated or kind of elegant experience for the user, we now have those integrated experiences coming to the Surface device, right? So it's carrying forward that chip to cloud security posture while also meeting those legacy requirements of the government for network authentication.
Interestingly, one of the things you said made me wonder, do you find agencies asking more about that elegant experience? You mentioned that word elegant, but I feel like that desire to have better customer experience for actual federal users is becoming more important.
Absolutely, yeah. I think as kind of the premium product in the Windows ecosystem for end user computing, we really went to try to solve that legacy requirement in integrated smart card readers in a way that also drove or increased user experience and usability. So I think as you look at those products, as maybe get an opportunity to do so, you'll see that rather than just open the chassis up and integrate a smart card reader, we actually created a design change that also allowed for an ergonomic typing experience and integrated some other legacy ports like integrated HDMI.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the keys in why the customer experience is so important on the endpoint device has to do with the user and the user's behavior. Because if it becomes too difficult to use in their daily operations, i.e. we lock the device down too much, people are going to strive and they're going to look for workarounds. So that experience really has to enable the things that the user needs to do with the device, but still has to provide for the security that agencies need to protect both national security and the privacy of citizen information.
Let's get overlap to my next question, Tony, was I was wondering about some of the issues that have had to change around policy and device management. There's a lot of talk about that. We know there's a lot moving on with zero trust architectures and all those things, but also just for the ability to use these devices wherever users are. What are agencies talking to you about when it comes to that?
Well, the pandemic, basically accelerated the whole telework discussion, which led to an immediate policy change for organizations to even allow for telework. So that debate was essentially solved. Now we're dealing with these hybrid work environments, and that, of course, from a policy perspective, has changed many of the workflows that are involved in government. And so not only has it affected edge devices and cybersecurity, but it's also affected the network and the need for more bandwidth. That requires more policy changes on how agencies are going to and users are going to interact. Because when they went to work from home, they had to go into their data centers and then back out of their data centers to get to their cloud solutions. So that workflow changed, and therefore the network bandwidth demands were different, and how they secured perimeters became different. Before, they were inside a secure perimeter going out for particular information. Now they're inside. The other big area from a policy standpoint that we saw was people exiting the workforce. So just like it was on the private sector side, it was in government as well. So they saw a number of people retiring. That's created not only workforce gaps, but knowledge gaps as well. So while there's plenty of opportunity to bring in new, fresh, professional talent into the government workforce, they need to be trained. And so this is creating an opportunity for more training and development. And probably one of the biggest areas where they're stressed today is on the acquisition side. They're looking for acquisition professionals. They have big demands because the government spends a lot of money, and acquiring these solutions takes time.
Do you find that happening when you're working with agencies and the things they're asking you for and what they want has changed radically in some of these contracts and some of these negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, it really seems to have changed a lot, right? I mean, I think rapid acquisition and ease of acquisition is certainly kind of on the forefront of what they're trying to do. We've seen that with kind of this OTA process and how that's really kind of revolutionized contracting over the past few years. And I think we're going to see that continue to carry forward, right? Not just how they acquire things, but maybe even a standardization of how they acquire across not just a singular agency, but multiple agencies, to leverage standardization for security purposes, but also to leverage economies of scale.
Yeah, you see that already happening with some within agencies, like you said, like a headquarters OTA, and then sub-agencies will be able to ride on that OTA or ATO, depending on if it's still the older one.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that is starting to change, and there are seemingly the potential for even broader changes coming up. Let's talk about DoD for a second and Section 889 and that supply chain security and some things that you guys have done around that.
Yeah, I think that FY19 National Defense Authorization Act that had that Section 889 clause in it really seems to have been like a catalyst moment for the government with a focus on supply chain and specifically supply chain coming out of adversarial nations. Microsoft, thankfully, thoughtfully sourced our component products and immediately were able to meet the Section 889 clause as it was intended to be met. But I think it really woke us up and everyone up to the idea that we really need to do end-to-end attestation and validation of our supply chains to make sure that we are as secure as we intend to be and as our government customers demand us to be. And we've carried that principle forward since FY19 and are working collaboratively now with the government to shape things like what we saw in FY22 in the National Defense Authorization Act. Again, another subset that increases focus on secure supply chain and defining secure supply chain requirements for the DoD. And I think as they're looking to draft FY23. And like we saw with the FY19 one, while these are coming out of the Department of Defense, they really are propagating across the entire federal government. So that Section 889 clause was adopted widely by GSA and the other civilian cabinet level agencies. We've seen adoption across several of the U.S. commercial verticals, certainly across a few of the Five Eyed, allied intelligence country nations. And we're expecting the same thing for that FY22 National Defense Authorization Act and the focus that has on non-Chinese based PCBs and PCBAs, as well as that defining of secure supply chain requirements, both physical and software based.
Right, that's a huge piece of it. Can you actually document what you're telling us?
Yes.
Right. And you just alluded to the fact that it might have come out of DoD, but it has seemed to have proliferated pretty far and pretty wide. And what are you finding when agencies and customers are coming to talk to you guys about this, and what are the challenges they're having?
Well, I mean, it's pretty significant. I mean, Section 889 really was an eye-opener for everybody in that it just showed what adversaries were capable of doing, embedding, backdoors into technology. And that's why they banned the use of certain technologies in environments, because it opened those doors. But further, guidance has been issued in and around the DFARS for the supply chain, and I won't try to rattle off the DFAR number by memory. But then there's also the cybersecurity framework and NIST 800-171, and trying to adopt to the cyber security maturity model certification as that evolves, all to protect our national security interests and our personal information in government. So in the contracting community, this is, the pendulum swings and everybody's racing to get there and to be first. And, as we roll it out, the government is still trying to figure out its policy decisions and work through them. So being first isn't always the best answer. So at Ingram Micro, we spend a lot of time trying to address the commercial items, the IT commercial items, federal acquisition regulations in the FAR and the DFAR in our standard agreements with our partners and our vendor relationships. We go to outside sources, but we leverage our own subject matter expertise to educate and train the partners in these areas so that they understand them and are well aware of what's expected of them if they're going to participate in the supply chain. So this is not only going to benefit government, but it's also going to benefit those other 16 industries and sectors that the Department of Homeland Security has identified as being critical to our national security, whether it's banking or agriculture or energy industry. So these things are incredibly important, and then we're seeing what it will ultimately do is benefit us in a much more resilient supply chain. We're going to see more sources for similar types of technology solutions. That drives more competition, and through more competition, you typically drive more innovation, as organizations compete. So this is a win-win for everybody as we go down this path. But it is going to have some challenges and some pain along the way.
Sure will, yeah. And Microsoft, specifically to our hardware products and Surface and HoloLens, while we own a sizable chunk of what I like to call kind of the end-to-end supply chain from component all the way to government doorstep, we don't own all of it, right? And we're dependent on the incredible partnerships of Ingram Micro to kind of deliver that really important leg of the supply chain and making sure that they're meeting all the requirements of the way that they have done traditionally and are intending to do, as Tony mentioned.
I mean, the truth of the matter is there's fewer and fewer single procurement winners anymore. There's often teams, parties, multiple layers in them. And I think that's kind of a testament to that and how it actually works in reality. We'll be right back with Ingram Micro's Tony Celesti and Microsoft Federal's Dylan Evers. This is Federal News Network, and I'm Vanessa Roberts.